The Covenant Code, a new reading of the ancient writing. This paper was originally read by Paul Hocking and Moshe Klein at the 2022 International Conference of the Society of Biblical Literature as part of the Stylistics in the Hebrew Bible program. The text of this video, the handout, and the full academic paper giving the detailed argument are all available separately. This brief presentation proposes a new way of reading the Torah text because it argues for a different way of understanding the writing as a literary weave. We illustrate the reading of one literary unit from Exodus, but the same principles have been applied across the whole of the Torah, 86 units in all. Our text unit, Exodus 22:17 to 23:19, in Hebrew and in English, is available as a full page in the handout. So you're not meant to read what's on the slide here, just to see an image of the unit structure as a whole. This slide shows a summary of the verses in each segment or pericope. It can be seen that it's made up of 5 literary triads. The segments are read in exactly the same order as in the linear text in the Bible, using the verse numbers as in the Hebrew Bible, 22:17, 18, 19, 22:20, and so on. For ease of reference, the 5 textual triads are numbered 1 to 5. And each member of a triad we will call a segment, lettered consecutively, L on the left, M in the middle, and R on the right. We argue that it shows a consistent relationship between its composition and its theme, and that the law should be seen in triads rather than separately. The resulting construct can be conceived as a 2-dimensional table. However, we suggest the more culturally appropriate metaphor would be to consider the text as a weave containing warp and weft threads as if woven on a loom. The identification of woven composition in such texts presents new possibilities for understanding the literary context of specific laws. The meaning of any given law is a function of its place in the weave, as defined by its warp and weft. The surprising thing, we argue, is that the formal relationship between the segments, indicated by the repeating literary devices, both horizontally and vertically, embeds functional significance, a kind of meta-meaning, which appears to have rhetorical purpose, like different colours or patterns in a weave. So, one of the most important observations for deriving meaning from this composition is that the flow of ideas is from triad to triad, rather than from law to law. It may help to see the big picture or map up front, so it is easier to follow the details as we progress. From triad to triad, that is, from thread to thread of the weave, the text becomes more complex in structure and in concept. It moves in stages from addressing social outsiders, thread 1, through increasingly complex levels of social organization, threads 2 to 4, to the ultimate form of society, the nation, with its own calendar and relationship with the deity, thread 5. This composition forms the picture in the horizontal weft threads, its rhetorical purpose. The vertical warp threads, the columns, however, are based on a set of concepts which could be labelled as the mundane and the divine, or the immanent and the transcendent. Warp thread L on the left addresses earthly, worldly, and even once underworldly matters, while every segment in thread R on the right refers to the deity, Yahweh, either by name or in its use of first-person address. Thread M in the middle appears as a conceptual middle with an interplay between the dyads defined by the left and the right segments. This presents the text as if on a textual loom, the one employed by the weaver of texts in designing and creating the weave. To illustrate the principles, we'll just look at the first, second, and fourth threads in some detail. The process requires a close reading of each thread based on the Hebrew text. The English translation on the handout, as here for thread 1, is generally word for word, following the Hebrew lexemes and syntax closely. We recognise this is poor translation for normal purposes, but we've tried to retain in English the lexical repetitions and syntactical relationships in the Hebrew. We've also spaced the text within each segment to try and line up matching text in parallel segments. We consider the resonances in the text are important for the initiated reader as they indicate the formal or rhetorical architecture. So, thread 1. The one sorcerying, in the feminine, i.e. the sorceress, shall not live. Anyone lying with a beast surely shall be put to death. The one sacrificing to the gods shall be destroyed, unless to Yahweh, to him alone. As you can see, this triad is made up of 3 laws, which at first reading seem very dissimilar, but on close reading one notices. Number 1, they all commence in Hebrew with a participial noun. The one sorcerying, in the feminine, meaning the sorceress. Then, anyone lying with a beast. And thirdly, the one sacrificing to other gods. Secondly, they all declare a penalty for the prohibited behavior. And thirdly, the verbs are all written in the third person, which is in fact unique in this whole unit. The thread contains 3 forbidden actions: sorcery, bestiality, and idolatry. And all 3 receive divine sentence and in increasing severity. On the left, she shall not live. In the middle, he shall surely be put to death. And on the right, he shall be destroyed. It is clear that such individuals are persona non grata, outcast, not to be regarded as part of Yahweh's people or community. It appears that the literary indicators guide the reading and so the interpretation. The core structure of each law is identical. The one doing this action, X, shall be outcast or negated. With the first case on the left, it's the very action or substance of sorcery intrinsically which is unworthy of life. In just 3 Hebrew words, mechashepha, lo, techayeh, it states that the one practicing witchcraft is not to enjoy life itself. However, with the opposite case, on the right, it's the object or direction of the action extrinsically which is key. Sacrificing to, Hebrew le, other gods instead of to Yahweh, to him alone. The deity is the ultimate other or extrinsic being. And finally, between these two extremes, in the middle, the focus is on the combination of the action with the object. One lying with, Hebrew im, a beast, a human being mixing with an animal, intrinsic and extrinsic natures being combined inappropriately. Next, let's look at thread 2 in the unit, which is a bit fuller in content, but again, the rhetorical rules are the same. The literary indicators guide the reading and so the meaning of the triad thread. The rhetorical colour intensifies in thread 2 when compared with thread 1 in two significant ways. All three segments of 2 describe social interactions and also give reasons for observing the commandments. In thread 1, there were no interactions mentioned with the outcast individuals. But in thread 2, all three segments address a person's interactions, as underlined, with the weak and disenfranchised individuals, shown in red, the sojourner, widows and orphans, and the poor. These three categories of relationship appear to range from the first segment 2L, the sojourner, Geir in Hebrew, the potential outcast, so similar to those in thread 1, across to the third segment 2R regarding the poor, but described as my people, the poor among you, and also your fellow. The repeated template in all three segments is the disenfranchised you shall not oppress. So thread 2 addresses correct behavior towards the weak in Yahweh's society, my people. Next, the two poles give significant reasons for this principle, shown boxed. In 2L, the reason given is because of the people's experience in history. For, in Hebrew ki, you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. They know from their experience what it means to be oppressed as sojourners in a foreign land, so now they should know that they should not oppress other foreigners who reside in their land. In 2R, in contrast, the reason given for right behavior is because of Yahweh's nature, what he declares about his character. When he, your poor fellow, cries out to me, I will hear, for, ki, I am compassionate. Therefore, it seems clear that the whole triad has been carefully authored as an integrated thread. In 2L, the reason not to oppress the disenfranchised is immanent, intrinsic to their history. In 2R, it's extrinsic in the nature of the transcendent, his compassion. And in the middle, in 2M, the reason not to oppress the disenfranchised, widows and orphans, combines both of these. It's inherent in the transcendent's compassion for the oppressed. When he indeed cries out to me, I will indeed hear his cry. And his passion against the oppressor is worked out in his imminent engagement with the oppressor's personal history, measure for measure. My wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives will become widows, and your children orphans. So the first two threads have common rhetorical characteristics and show signs of being carefully woven designs, not simply a collection of laws. Thread 1 is made up of a triad of short laws with no reason given. Thread 2 is made up of a triad of longer laws and with a reason given for each. Then thread 3, another step up in structural complexity. Each segment is made up of a pair of laws, A and B, so 3 pairs of laws about authority in Yahweh's society. But for brevity, we will move on to thread 4 as our next illustration. However, firstly, let's make a brief comment on 2 forms of rhetoric in ancient texts. Traditionally, in dialectics, an argument is set out in 3 sequential stages: thesis, then its antithesis, and finally the synthesis. We could call this oral or logical rhetoric. However, we've seen our text seems composed as triads in which the center element is a middle, a conceptual middle that combines elements of the right and the left poles. This type of rhetoric one could call visual rhetoric, where the argument seems composed as thesis over against antithesis, and with a synthesis in the middle. Such logic seems disjunctured when read linearly, but when seen or conceived visually as a whole, it becomes coherent. It's quite remarkable, but we claim that the whole of the Torah is organized on this principle, and indeed, in passing, also the whole of the Mishnah, the 520 plus chapters. Our author now uses this visual approach to rhetoric in organizing thread 4. Thread 4 is significantly more complex than the previous threads, and is itself an integrated weave within the weave of the whole unit. It provides a vivid example of the author's visual mode of composition. Without visualizing the relationships between the elements of the thread, it is virtually impossible to grasp the literary plan. Each segment in thread 4 is made up of 3 laws, consisting of a pair of matching elements, laws A and B, followed by a third element, C, which appears to address a different subject from the first 2. They represent a double visualization. The paired elements A and B present the persons present in a court of law, witnesses, adversaries, and judges, while the C element pictures the balance of justice. Together they form an image of social justice. The literary balance of justice is formed by the C elements, all of which refer to the disenfranchised of thread 2. On one side, 4LC is a warning against favouring the disenfranchised, the poor, which seems strange if read alone. However, on the other side, 4RC is a warning against oppressing the disenfranchised, the sojourner. In the middle is an instruction not to skew or tilt the balance in either direction regarding the needy. A balance throughout history has represented the foundation of social justice, upon which stands the whole of the legal system. The courtroom or legal system is represented through the imagery of the A-B pairs. Witnesses on the left, LA and LB, and judges on the right, RA and RB, form the framework of the court. However, the function of the donkey lying down under its load in M is not obvious. Its parallel in Deuteronomy contains virtually identical laws, except there they refer to your brother's ox, as opposed to your enemy's ox and donkey in this text. Clearly, in this literary context about the legal system, such individuals, enemies or adversaries, are potential litigants, those who may have recourse to the courts, and thus they are in the centre, at the focus. The system exists because of them and for them. They are flanked by the other persons needed for the court to function, witnesses and judges. The three sets of persons described by the paired laws of 4a and 4b are supported and underscored by 4c, the balance of social justice. Our author needed to introduce the lost and suffering beasts of the adversaries in 4m in order to create the picture of the legal system embedded in the weave. All the laws are conceptual colours employed to create a woven image. We have shown how the writer has invested significantly in coordinating matters of form and content in three of the threads, like a literary weaver. We will now summarise how they are coordinated in the 5 threads as a whole, showing the flow from thread to thread in the weft. Both the themes and structures of the threads progress similarly from thread to thread according to a principle of complexity. They flow from the simple to the complex. The structures of the threads become more complex as they depict successively more complex social relationships. Thread 1 contains single terse laws about outsiders, excluded individuals, to have no interaction with Yahweh's people. Thread 2 describes interactions between individuals and the weak or disenfranchised in society, each segment including a single law and its reason. Thread 3 introduces the interface of people with authorities using a pair of laws in each segment. Then, the complex visualization created by thread 4 integrates individuals into the civil legal system while increasing the number of laws in each segment to 3. And finally, thread 5 shows a complex 6+1 structure reflecting the 1+6 pattern in threads 1 to 4 and setting out the national order for Yahweh's nation with its annual rhythm set by a divinely appointed calendar. Saying it another way, in the central block, we have 1 law in row 2, 2 laws in row 3, 3 laws in row 4. So 6 laws within the framework. Then, there is 1 law in the opening row, row 1, so a 1+6 set of laws in the first 4 lines. This is then reflected in the laws in the closing row 5 about sabbatical years, Sabbath and sacrifices, which has repeating terms 6 and the 7th, so 6+1. This helps explain the strange final law about a kid in its mother's milk, an outsider, which doesn't belong with the 6 laws in its segment, so again a 6+1 pattern. In conclusion, it seems clear from the above analysis that this literary unit of laws from the Covenant Code has been evidentially composed as a two-dimensional construct. This video and the full paper offers the ancient skill of weaving as a helpful metaphor for this construct, with the text cloth woven on a 5x3 loom of warp and weft threads. The warp, vertical threads, create a supporting structure with the laws on the left thread relating to the mundane, the laws on the right thread relating to the divine, and the laws combining mundane and divine matters on the middle thread. The weft or horizontal threads create the pattern design in the weave. In this case, the flow of meaning, like the colour down the threads of text, suggests a process of socialization or nation building. This holistic reading is only possible by the recognition of each segment as a function of its position in the composition or weave. Such a design is evidentially composed purposefully to express a meaning and a suasive intent beyond a catalogue of laws. We suggest that insights from the ancient art of weaving allow us to read these texts with new appreciation.